Hello again, and welcome to this interview in the series that is all about empowering a league of extraordinary mothers on how to get more energy, the body we love, and that zest for life that we all crave. Today we have with us Jules Galloway. Jules is a passionate naturopath. She's a speaker and a podcaster with over 10 years of clinical experience. Jules's mission is to help exhausted, busy women find their shine again using whole foods and, amongst other things, a healthy dose of humour. Welcome, Jules, and thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this chat today.
Yeah, me too. Me too. We were just saying before we hit record that we probably could have hit record like 20 minutes ago.
we just started talking about things and we got all passionate about stuff and went, I should have recorded that.
Yeah, off we go. Anyway, we'll cover some of it again. Jules, let's start with your story. How did you come to be doing the work that you're doing?
Oh, how long have you got? Okay. So I grew up I'll show my age here and say I grew up in the 1980s on a standard 1980s Australian diet where everything was white and low fat because Dad had been diagnosed with high cholesterol and Mum came across the Pritikin book and the Canbrook multi-steamer at about the same time. So I grew up on the wheat bix and the white bread and the low fat foods and the skim milk, and no one was getting any healthier, and I had a couple of family members with celiac disease, which was very rare, to be diagnosed with that back then. It's very common now for people to be across it. And they were on the gluten-free, low-fat everything, and I was still eating the normal bread and the normal wheat bix and the normal everything, and I thought I'd dodged a bullet because I didn't have to eat the gluten-free food. Yet I was just one of those unhealthy, sickly, catches everything that comes along kids. Yeah. If there was any sort of ear, nose, throat, chest infection, cold, flu, snot, ear infection, tonsillitis, like recurrent tonsillitis, recurrent bronchitis, failure to thrive almost, like I came second last in every race at school, and everyone just said, oh, look, she's just one of those kids who catches everything that comes along. So even though I thought I'd dodged this genetic bullet, no one picked up at that time that it was possibly due to the diet that I was eating. And it wasn't until much later when, instead of having colds and flus and chest infections and snot and postnasal drip, like I couldn't remember a day when I was a kid that I didn't have the runny nose, and it was worse in winter. It was just streaming in winter. And it wasn't until later when I started to get more serious stuff happening, or really annoying stuff happening, that I started to dig deeper. And so it started to turn into digestive issues, chronic bouts of thrush. You've got depression, anxiety, like joint pain. Things were starting to really ramp up. And that was in my 20s. And then I went to see a naturopath. And it was like this light bulb moment where I started making these connections about the food that I'd been eating and the repercussions of that, because it turns out I was intolerant to the usual suspects, the gluten, the dairy, and also the sugar was having an effect on me as well. In my late 30s, we added a layer where I realised I had some pesky little gene mutations, like MTHFR and a couple of other things that I discovered there, plus a lovely thing called pyrrole disorder. And so by that stage, I was actually already a naturopath. But yeah, I chose to become a naturopath.
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to pause it just for a second. Sorry, I had to pause it for a minute. My dog decided at that moment that he was going to vomit. Don't you love a bit of reality TV? There it is. Yes, Jules, I love it.
This is real life, people, real life.
We love it, yeah. At least it wasn't one of the kids. I don't know which is worse, but anyway.
At least you can throw the dog outside. That's the difference.
Yeah, that's right. Get out. Get out. I interrupted you. You were just talking about pyrroles, and I'm sure that there's going to be lots of people that have no idea what that is. So let's keep going.
Yeah, we'll get into that, I think, down the track. I was in my 30s by the time I became a naturopath, and I was working really, really hard. And as you do when you first come out of college, you try everything. And I was working 6 days a week, multiple jobs, clinic on the side, full-time job over here. I was working at a drug rehabilitation center, as well. So because that was a really amazing experience, actually. So I was doing so many things and wearing so many hats. And then I was doing corporate for a while as well, where I was working at least 50 hours a week and traveling interstate a lot. And it wasn't until I woke up in a hotel room one day and I couldn't remember what city I was in that I thought, maybe things need to change here. And I realized that I'd driven myself to the point of burnout. I had adrenal fatigue. I hadn't fully addressed all this underlying stuff that was going on with my gut. I'd been taking a raft of supplements because as a naturopath, there's like a supplement for everything. So there's a pill for everything. Yeah. So where the fruit bowl should have been with fruit in it on my kitchen bench, it was a fruit bowl just full of supplements. Yeah. And I was like, okay, but it's fine because I've got the fish oil for the joint pain and I've got the glucosamine that does the joint pain as well. That's good. And what else have we got? Okay, so I need magnesium and I've got gut healing stuff and I've got B vitamins to pep me up and adrenal herbs. And I thought I was doing really well. And I still hit the wall. And I hit the wall because there was no fruit in that fruit bowl. I wasn't eating terribly well. I was living on takeaway and convenience food, even though I should have known better. And that's when I had to stop what I was doing and do a whole reassessment of how I did everything, because just shoveling in hundreds of dollars worth of supplements doesn't work if the fundamentals aren't there. And the fundamentals were dealing with the stress, fixing up the diet, eating a whole food diet, and going back to avoiding those foods that had crept back in, because they do creep back in when you're not looking after yourself. Yeah. And then also changing my mindset, and around how I deal with stress and what I perceive as stress as well, because I didn't realize that, because I actually really loved my job at that time, but I was extremely busy, but I hadn't put two and two together that busy was the same as stress. Yeah. So fast forward, I'm now in Byron Bay. We left our corporate jobs in Melbourne and up to Byron we came. And I now have a practice up here. But to be honest, 95% of my clients are either Skype or phone, because most of them are busy women in big cities who are busy, stressed, tired, exhausted, and at that point of burnout that I was at a while back.
So we all need to move to Byron is the answer. Is that
yeah, no, because then we'd get full.
Don't come. It's bad.
Come and visit. Seriously, come and visit though, because it's a beautiful place to heal. It really is. That's why we come here.
Yeah. There's a couple of bits in there. One is that, as I listen to you talk about the childhood stuff, that's a fairly typical picture of what was going on when we were kids. I mean, I'm a 70s kid, but, all these acute illnesses. But now when I look at my kids and their generation, it's changed to chronic illnesses, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's scary.
You don't hear about these acute illnesses so much as the chronic illnesses that just arrive and don't go away. It's a real shift in that, that sort of 20-year period, isn't it? Do you see that in practice? Does that make sense?
To be honest, I think the acute illnesses are almost just seen to be normal now, and it's been normalised to the point where the chronic illnesses are the ones that stand out. We're accepting things like asthma, ADHD, as being normal, like snotty kids are normal. Yep. Kids with ear infections, tonsillitis, recurrent tonsillitis, all those things that I was experiencing when I was little, we're still seeing, I think. But maybe they don't make it to the naturopath anymore, because now we've got really good acute care, natural acute care in health food shops, where you can just pop down to your Go Vita or pop down to your local herbal dispensary, and there's some brilliant ones all around Australia where you can go in and they'll either have a herb mix ready to go or some sort of concoction ready to go, or they'll make up a mix for you if there's a naturopath behind the counter. And I used to do that when I first graduated years ago in like 2006. I was an acute care naturopath in a dispensary in Blackrock in Victoria. And yeah, we did still see a lot of that stuff, but I don't think they make it always to the naturopath until they get to that sort of chronic state. And I just see so many people talking about asthma and eczema and ADHD and all those childhood things as if it's just part of life, but it doesn't need to be.
Yeah. Well, there was two things. Now I can't think what the second thing was. It'll come back to me. So let's look at, I think that whole burnout picture for mums, whether it's adrenal fatigue or, some other label that's been popped in there. Let's look at that, because I just see that is something that's so rampant, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. We have this picture of go, 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 and there's no stop. So can we talk about the consequences of that on the body and what we're looking at?
Yeah, I think things have changed a lot in the last 20 years. And I still remember life before Facebook. Just.
Yeah.
We were talking about this the other night. It's like, what did we do before Facebook? It's like how the kids of these days, the 20-somethings these days are like, how did people meet before Tinder? It's like, well, we used to go out and swap phone numbers. And yeah, so like, what did we used to do for downtime before Facebook? And we would sit down with a cup of tea or a book, or sit down and do nothing, or sit in the sun and do nothing, God forbid, do nothing, or pick up the phone and have a nice chat with someone that we care about. You might ring your mum or your sister or your girlfriend or someone. And that's what we used to do for downtime, except now our downtime is uptime. Like, our downtime is social media. So we don't have these being downtimes. We have these doing downtimes. So as soon as we've got that spare 5 minutes, we're on the phone. And we're doing everything. So I think what that has done is it's further activated our fight or flight response. And look, most people watching this, I'm sure you already know what the fight or flight response is, but in a nutshell, it's where the body perceives something as being stress, and it activates a cascade of stress hormones in the body. And the one that we usually measure in functional medicine and not naturopathy is cortisol. So what happens is your body thinks it's in danger, and it activates this production of cortisol, and the cortisol gives you that energy and strength and speed of brain, of thinking, and in the body to take fight or flight. So look, that was great back in the days when we needed to get away from tigers and bears, but we don't have to do that so much now. But this is a system that still activates if you're in a queue at the supermarket, but you're like trying to get home because you're on a tight schedule. This is something that activates when your boss rings you and you know that there's something they're going to get you to do that's going to just kamikaze your day. This is a system that activates when you're in a queue somewhere, right? Anywhere, or a traffic jam. So if you're sitting, if you're in Melbourne and you're sitting on Punt Road, your fight or flight is being activated just because you're constantly looking for that lane change or that red light or hoping to get ahead. So unfortunately, this is a system that used to only trigger occasionally when we were in great danger, and now it's a system that triggers all the time. Yes. So what does that do to us? It places us in a constant state of being on edge, and our cortisol levels go up. And as those cortisol levels go up, there's repercussions for our bodies and our minds. And at first, when your cortisol levels go up, you actually feel really good. You feel really alive. You feel really activated. You feel powerful and strong, because remember, the whole point of fight or flight is to get the blood to the muscles in your arms and legs, to make your brain think faster in case you need to make snap decisions. It's getting you activated and ready to take on a challenge. So at first we're in fight or flight and we're like, I got so much done today. I smashed my to-do list. I got everything done. Tick, 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 tick. I'm amazing. Superwoman cape is on. We're like, we're so good at this, right? I am so good at this. So that's all well and good, but you can't live there. It's not sustainable.
Yep.
It is not a sustainable state because you're full of stress hormones. And while you're thinking faster and feeling really good, there's very little energy going to your digestive system because that had to divert to make you able, like, as if your body's going to need to digest food when you're getting away from a tiger, right? So, and also it's diverting hormones and energy away from your reproductive system because, like, who needs to make babies while we're trying to get away from danger, right? So that gets shelved as well. So many other deemed non-essential processes in the body get sidelined until it's safe for them to come back online again. And in the meantime, everything's focused around the stress and getting away from the stress. So can you live there? No, you can't.
Yeah, and that I mean, the multitude of different systems in our bodies that is affecting. So whether we're trying to actually get more energy, that having that high cortisol all the time means that you hit a roadblock, don't you? There's only so much that you can do. And whether we're trying to lose weight or weight management, stress affects that. It just across the board, isn't it?
Well, in terms of weight management, cortisol increases an insulin response. So as your cortisol goes up in the body, the amount of insulin you secrete when you eat carbohydrates and sugars goes up. So say if you're not stressed and your cortisol's cool, like, you would eat some carbohydrates with your lunch and feel really good. Okay, fine. But as people get more stressed and more wrung out because they've been in this fight or flight state for a while, what's happening is that all those chemicals that are going on in the body that are talking to each other have told your body to actually produce more insulin in response to carbohydrate and sugar intake, which means you now eat the carbohydrates and the sugar, you feel really good for about 45 minutes, and then you just crash and burn about 2 hours later, and that is your 3:30-itis that everyone talks about. And the reason for that is the cortisol and the fight or flight response that has activated this system and taken a situation and made it much worse. So when your insulin is being produced in extra amounts when you eat the carbs, guess what that does to the body? It tells your body to store the carbohydrates as fat rather than burn them for energy. And your body's really smart. It's actually trying to help you. Like, if you're stacking on weight around the tummy when you're stressed, you should actually say a little thank you to your body, because it thinks that if you're stressed, right, remember, it thinks there's tigers and bears around, right? So if there's tigers and bears around, there's no food. You can't go out and hunt and gather if there's a fire, a flood, a famine, wild animals. So if you're in fight or flight, your body's like, hey, I've got this, because in order to make sure you've got enough food, right, I'm going to make sure you don't starve by taking the food that you eat and stashing it around your belly in case tomorrow there's nothing to eat. So it's actually trying to save you from starvation, but what it's doing is packing on extra weight around the middle. And then I get women who come to me and say, oh, I want to go low carb, or I want to do, this keto diet. And is that okay? And I'm like, well, your body is then going to think that you're starving, and it's basically going to be like, I told you so. And so if you're full of cortisol and then you go low carb on top of that, it might actually take that situation and make it worse. So we need to get the cortisol down, and we need to deal with the stress first before we hit the diet. Yeah.
It's a really, really critical conversation, isn't it? Because whenever there's any kind of weight management discussion, it's food and exercise, food and exercise, food and exercise. And this critical piece, this stress piece, just is never brought up. It's never part of what we are hearing in mainstream, all the information that we get of the how-tos.
No. And we exercise harder because we're women. We're like, hey, if exercising a little bit in the past has helped get the weight off, you know what? I've put on lots of weight, so I'm going to go and exercise harder. So then they go and sign up for like HIIT training. That HIIT training increases cortisol.
Stress.
Like, not yet. One of the biggest things I do with a lot of my burnout and adrenal fatigue clients is just counsel them around it's very counterintuitive, but pulling back on some of that training just for a little while until we get the cortisol down. Then you can go back to your HIIT or your CrossFit or whatever it is you're doing. But for the moment, or running really long distances can also have that effect on cortisol. So even though we think we need to burn it off by doing these full-on exercises, it might actually, again, be taking a bad situation and making it worse.
Yeah. It is such a common picture. And as I sit here, I'm thinking about one of my clients who has 5 children that she homeschools, and she's got chronic fatigue, and she came to me because of the chronic fatigue and weight issues. And we were looking at diet, and I was going, there's a lot you're getting right with this diet. What's going on? And she literally hadn't had an hour to herself in about 14 years. And that was the picture. That was the picture. But she's not alone. There's lots of us that are doing this.
Yeah.
So what are let's look at some ideas, some top 3 ideas that you have around getting this mindset shift happening. How do we do the downtime? How do we do the stop time? Do we all have to sit and meditate with incense? Is that kind of is incense, is that the critical bit? Do I need to no.
But would we do that? Would anyone actually do that? Even if you and I sat here and said, you'll just need to get 20 minutes of meditation every day, 2 people will do it and everyone else would be like, are you mad?
Yeah.
Like, I've got kids running around. So we have to come up with a lot of workarounds depending on your home situation, your living situation, whether you get moments to yourself when the kids are at school, whether the kids are home all day. That makes a really big difference. Like, is there a way to steal those moments back, to get those moments for yourself? Because that's the first step. There's no point in telling your mum with the 5 kids to go and do a whole bunch of meditation if they're being homeschooled.
Yeah.
So is she going to have to maybe call in some help and then take herself out to go and do some sort of relaxation, meditation, walk, yoga, whatever it is for her? But she might have to remove herself from the house, get someone in to look after the kids, because I couldn't see her getting those quiet moments. It's like there'll be a knock on the door or someone will be fighting within like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So we have to, everyone's different. I think it's all well and good to tell people what they need to do, but we need to find an individualized plan for each person depending on what they can realistically do. Yep. But the first thing I would say is see if you can steal some time back somewhere. Like, can you get to school pickup 10 minutes early and get one of those mindfulness apps? Notice I didn't say meditation, because meditation makes people run screaming from the building unless they're experienced. But like a mindfulness app is, it's not quite as confronting. And there's some beautiful mindfulness apps and podcasts where they're like 5, 8, 10-minute chunks.
Yeah.
Where if you just manage to don't rush to school pickup, because that would defeat the purpose. But if you can organise yourself enough to get to that school pickup 5 minutes early, put the headphones in, park around the corner where the other mums won't see you maybe, so they don't want to start chatting. But, get the earphones in, shut your eyes, 5 minutes, right? It's been documented that you can get cortisol to come down in just a few minutes. Yeah. So it is possible. The other thing that I get people to do that anyone can do is start a gratitude practice, because that actually puts the brain into a state where it's producing the happy chemicals and it's not producing so many stress hormones in that moment. But rather than just writing down one thing you're grateful for, because that's too easy, we need at least 3. You could fill a whole page if you've got time, but 3 things is a really good starting point every single day. It'll take you a few minutes to think of those 3 things and write them down. And while your brain is thinking of it and writing it down, it's not producing so many stress hormones, so that anybody can do that. And that one, if you get interrupted, so be it. You can go back to it. So that one's a little bit easier to sort of keep up even when there's chaos going around you. Yeah. So that would be 2 really good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, I actually keep my gratitude journal beside my bed. It's the last thing I do at night. I find that's my time. It's, you've just got to find that time that works for you.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, I noticed I did an update on my iPhone the other day, and hey, I'm guilty as charged as well with all this social media stuff.
Yeah.
But I did notice that your iPhone will now tell you how many minutes, or in my case, hours, you spend on social media.
Yeah, right.
And if I dared say I don't have time to meditate or go to yoga or do Pilates or whatever it is that's the thing that I know that is going to help, if I dared to say I didn't have time and my iPhone app is sitting there telling me that I've spent 2 hours on social media this week, well, I think it was Marie Forleo, one of those wonderful people, who said that when someone says they don't have time, what they're actually saying is, this is not a priority for me, or this is not important to me. Because we have time. We have time. We're just spending it on things that we deem to be more important.
Yeah. Let's have a look at bringing some of this back to food, because it's really easy to get caught up in all the other things. But one of the things that I think is, worth having repeated discussions around is with stress, is how we go about eating. It's not just what we eat, but that time to sit and eat properly. But can we start with, let's start with some of, if you have somebody that comes in with adrenal fatigue or high stress, what are some of the dietary things that you look at? Can we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the last 12 months, or about 15 months, I've been running a program for adrenal fatigue. It's quite an intensive program, and it does include things like meal plans and recipes. And what I do, the first thing I do is I take out the gluten, the dairy, and the sugar. So I know people are going to hate me, but come on, you knew it was coming. You knew it. I'm a naturopath, as if I'm not going to take you off those things. So come on. So I take them off the gluten, the dairy, and the sugar. But rather than saying you can't have these things, we make sure that we put in things that you can have. So what I do is I get people eating more protein.
Yeah.
Because remember I was talking about like that insulin response when you've got stress.
Yeah.
But what happens is you end up on this blood sugar roller coaster, and like it's to the point where that is like a whole module in the course, just that. And I draw a picture of a roller coaster and everything. But you eat food, and if it's too heavy in carbohydrates and not enough protein, what happens is your blood sugar goes up, and then insulin comes out, and then insulin brings down the blood sugar, which is great because that has to happen. But what happens when you've got lots of insulin in the body? It makes you tired, it makes you emotional, it makes you sleepy, it makes you grumpy, and it makes you gain weight. Yep. So, and when we're in that sugar low, where that insulin's really low, what happens is we crave sugar to dig us out of that. So mid-morning, we're looking for cookies, we're looking for biscuits, you eat the sugar, and it goes back up. And so that roller coaster continues. So the only way to get people off that roller coaster is to give them less carbohydrates and more protein with those main meals, because then we stand a chance of not having such a huge insulin response, which means we won't bottom out and have those moments where we're feeling sleepy, grumpy, tired, emotional, and craving the foods. So if we then we can talk about taking out the gluten, the dairy, and the sugar, because what are the things you're going to crave when you're in that bit where you bottom out? Like, hello, can you get gluten, dairy, and sugar all into one thing and then eat all of that? Like, hello, muffins, biscuits, cakes. Yeah. Need I say more? Cheese on biscuits, cheese on toast, cheese sandwiches. But there's no point telling someone not to eat these things if we don't fix the reason they're craving it in the first place. It's just like telling someone not to smoke. It's like you need to explain to someone like what it's doing, and then to find something else for them to do that's going to help them with the process. You can't just go, just don't smoke. It doesn't work. You have to give people tools that they can use. Yeah. And it's the same with the food. You can't, if telling people not to eat gluten, dairy, and sugar worked, right, I would be out of a job by now.
Yeah.
Everyone would be fixed. There'd be no more sick people.
we wouldn't be looking at an epidemic of obesity and diabetes as well.
Exactly. It's not that easy. So we need to find out why it's not easy, and we need to go after that root cause and then look at dropping down the gluten, the dairy and the sugar.
Yep. Give us a yummy breakfast. What's a great brekkie? I love brekkie. It's my favourite meal of the day.
I'm a massive fan of smoothies for busy women because you can just chuck it in and go. And if you reckon you don't have time to eat, like my husband has his smoothie on the way to work. He's got like a thermos type thing that fits in the cup holder in the car, and it holds a whole smoothie. So there's no excuse. Like you can't say you're too busy or you're too tired or you don't have time to eat. That's the first one. But what I make sure is that people have got a good amount of protein in that smoothie. Otherwise it's not going to work, because remember, if we put too much fruit in and not enough protein, what's going to happen to that blood sugar? So yeah, smoothies are my number one go-to. But I understand some people live in places that are cold. Some people have like a damp kind of constitution. Doesn't work for them. So we can do things like chia puddings. I do things like I actually do a lot of eggs. I do a lot of eggs, but without the toast sometimes. So sometimes it's like eggs, spinach, tomato, mushrooms. Don't need the toast. Yeah, take away that toast and you've got, or halve the toast and you've got an amazing breakfast. That's usually my weekend go-to, is the big breakfast. Everything that's in the big breakfast minus the processed carbohydrates, minus the bread. What else? Sometimes I get...
What do you put in your smoothies? What's a favourite smoothie?
I would do half a banana. Not a full one. Half banana, handful of blueberries, about a quarter of a cup of cashews, a serve of paleo or vegan protein powder, so dairy-free, a good quality dairy-free protein powder, and water. I don't faff around with nut milks because they're expensive, and unless you get the really, really good ones, usually the ones that live in the fridge, like the Nutty Bruce, the other brands of nut milks are generally full of sunflower oils and fillers and gels and stuff. So I just think you're paying good money and getting crap a lot of the time. I have a high-speed blender, but it works in a bullet blender as well. So I just throw all of that in, and that quarter of a cup of cashews makes the smoothie really creamy, so that you don't even need the nut milk anyway. I
love coconut milk. That's my...
it's so good. It's so good. Some people can't handle the fat though when they're first starting out eating healthy. They kind of need to introduce that slowly. Like if you and I have probably been eating this way for a little bit longer, so our bodies can handle that. But some of my gallbladdery sort of people or my leaky gut people need to be introduced to the coconut milk quite slowly. The other reason I like doing the cashews and the water is because you're getting all the fiber and the protein that's in those cashews as well, because none of it's getting filtered out. You know, when you make nut milk, you're whizzing the nuts with water, but then you strain it and there's a whole lot of pulp that just gets chucked out. So there's very little protein in nut milk, and there's very little fiber in nut milk, but there's protein and fiber in nuts. So if we can actually just add the nuts to the smoothies, that works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. We do eggs 90% of the time in this house for brekkie. It's a favourite. It just works. And it keeps you, the satiety factor is what really works for us. So mostly we don't eat again until probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Kids come home from school and so on, then we have something else. So it just lasts. And we're getting, towards the end. We've probably got about 10 minutes. I think that I'd love you to talk about pyrrole a little bit, because I think it's something that a lot of people are unaware of, but it may be a bit of a light bulb for lots of women. So are you happy to talk about that for a few minutes, what it is and signs and symptoms and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do find that when people find out they have pyrrole disorder, it is life-changing, because finally they have an answer for why they were feeling a certain way for such a long time, even though other people were telling them to suck it up and that there's nothing wrong. So it's a real thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And it is something that can be managed Well, not easily, but if you've got someone guiding you who's a professional and knows what they're doing, it can be very well managed. And so what it is, okay, so some people, for whatever reason, we think there's some sort of genetic driver for it, but no one knows for sure yet. But for some reason, some people's bodies make too many of a substance called pyrols. Now, pyrols are these things that make up the outer ring of your hemoglobin molecule. So pyrols are something that you actually need in order to make healthy red blood cells. They're part of that. So they're a good thing. But for some reason, and like I said, we're not quite sure why yet, but some people just make too many of these pyrols. So some of them go to making your healthy red blood cells, and then you've got these extra ones floating around in the body. Now, in order to be safely removed from the body, they bind to your zinc and to your B6. They bind to a couple of other things as well, but we don't really like, biotin, etc. But we won't go into that so much. But the two key ones are your zinc and your B6. Now, the reason that's important is because when they're binding to that zinc and B6, they're being carried out of the body, and so is the zinc and the B6. So some people, for whatever reason, make more pyrols when they're stressed, when they're busy, when they're burnt out, when they have leaky gut, when they have parasites, when they have glandular fever. There's all these reasons that can trigger this overproduction of pyrols in a susceptible person. I know I make more of them now if I go through a stressful period. If I like recently I moved house, I had to up my zinc and B6 because I was moving house and selling a house and going through all that stuff. If I travel overseas, I know that I need extra supplements as well. Some people, it might be when their kids are, going through a time when they're not, when they're like hard to manage. So it really depends. And by the way, pyrrole disorder can run in families. So yeah, if you've got it, maybe your kids might have it as well, or one of them might have it as well. So what happens is the more pyrols you make, the more zinc and B6 gets flushed out, right? Now, symptoms of low zinc and low B6 can be adrenal issues because you need Bs in order to fuel your adrenal system. So your adrenals start to suffer. You need B6 to balance your female hormones. So your hormone balance starts to suffer. We see a lot of high estrogen and low progesterone, a lot of PMS, a lot of really angry PMS people, like really full-on PMS for a day before. We see a lot of exhaustion and fatigue. So if you just go and brush up on all your symptoms of zinc and B6 deficiency, that's bad enough. But the clincher is, as your zinc goes low, your copper goes up. So zinc and copper sit on a seesaw, and they do this. One can't be up without the other being down. Okay, that's how they work in the body. Now, copper in a small amount is a nutrient, and you'll occasionally see it in multivitamins because you need a little bit of copper as a nutrient to get the cells working. That's great. But too much copper acts like a heavy metal. Now, remember, your zinc's going down because your pyrols are up, right? So what happens to your copper? Your copper goes through the roof. Yeah. So by the time I see people for pyrrole disorder, it's usually because they're exhibiting symptoms of copper toxicity. And the symptoms of copper toxicity are things like anxiety, depression, extreme fatigue, exhaustion, burnout. Really, by this, copper loves estrogen. So by this stage, the PMS or endometriosis or, whatever name your female reproductive issue of choice, insert here. So you start to, and then that's when I start to see people getting autoimmune disorders, inflammatory conditions. I see a lot of joint pain. I see a lot of muscle pain. I've seen people with fibromyalgia who have got pyroles underpinning it all. So this is where we can go and do tests to find out if this is what's at the root cause of your issues. And this is why when I see people come to me for adrenal fatigue, which, by the way, is it's a controversial term because the adrenals don't actually get tired. Yeah. But adrenal fatigue is a bit of a glossy term for like a dysfunction in the body that happens between a few different organs. They call it HPA axis dysfunction. But when people come to me for adrenal fatigue, I don't just give them adrenal herbs. I feel like it's my job, my duty to look for any underlying drivers or issues that could have caused those adrenals to be having those problems in the first place. So it's not always just as simple as taking a herb or a supplement. for adrenal fatigue. And I see so many people like shoveling in licorice and ashwagandha / withania and all the ginsengs and all the things they read about on Google that are really great for adrenal fatigue. Yeah. But what if your so-called adrenal fatigue is being driven by something like this pyrrole disorder? All the herbs in the world aren't going to fix it. They're just going to be a lovely, glorious, expensive Band-Aid. Yeah. So yeah, we have tests for pyrroles that we can do. We have tests for copper, zinc, all those sorts of things I test for in my practice to help people get to the bottom of what's really going on.
If people go to their GP, can they get tested for pyrrole?
If they're an integrative GP, then yes, probably. If they're a biobalance type GP, then yes, probably. I've been to a seminar from Dr. Walsh, who is one of the pyrrole pioneers. They brought him out, BioBalance actually brought him out from America. And I sat in a room with like 300 doctors. So yes, there are some doctors who are across it, but a lot of your standard GPs are not across it yet, and you may get that same response that you get when you say to them, oh, I've got adrenal fatigue. So, which, by the way, is the same response that my mum had when she went to the doctor in the 1980s and said she had celiac disease. One of the doctors said, I don't believe in celiac disease. And look where we are now. Yes. So I went to the doctor a couple of years ago because I thought I'd taken a bit too much B6, and it's something you can test for, and that test is covered by Medicare. So I was like, you know what? Yeah. I'm not going to refer myself for a test that I have to pay for, because through my lab you have to pay a bit more. So I thought, I'm going to go through Medicare. My tax dollars at work. So off I go to the doctor. Sat down and he said, what would you like today? And I said, I just like the usuals, iron, vitamin D, a bit of a service, please. And by the way, could I get my B6? Because I've been taking a lot of B6 lately and want to make sure I haven't done too much. And he said, why are you taking B6? And I said, because I have this thing called pyrrole disorder. And he looked me square in the eyes and he said, I don't believe in pyrrole disorder. And I said, it's not effing Santa Claus. We don't get a choice here. But see, I've seen this before. I saw it in the 80s with celiac disease. I've seen it with adrenal fatigue. We're seeing it again with pyrrole disorder now. If your doctor isn't interested in helping you navigate this, find a doctor or a naturopath who can and will, and find someone who can show you that they're experienced at it. Because as you start to bring that copper down in a person, you really have to manage how quickly you bring that down. It's not as simple as just pumping a truckload of zinc into a person, because you can cause that copper to dump. You can make people's anxiety and depression worse. You can make people's rage worse. So we want to do things really safely. We don't want to place more stress on the body as we're getting that balance right. So make sure that you go to someone who has got that experience.
Yeah. We are going to have to wind this up. So let's go back to food. What's for dinner tonight? What are you having?
You know what? We are so lazy because the new place we've moved to is walking distance from the shops. Yep. And so there is nothing in the fridge yet. However, I think it's going to be steak and salad, because when there's nothing in the fridge, that's usually our go-to. Or another fallback option is usually a nourish bowl. So I'll throw on the rice cooker with a bit of brown rice or a bit of basmati rice. Off I go to the shops, and we just throw in whatever's around. So I've got some sweet potato up there. I could roast that, put that in the nourish bowl. I could chop up some chicken thighs, do that in some olive oil and paprika. That goes in the nourish bowl. Throw a few greens in there, little bit of sauerkraut, and maybe a bit of hummus or a bit of maybe some avocado or something to bring it all together. Yep. We're a massive fan of the nourish bowl at our house, because you can usually scrape together all manner of little bits of little things that are lurking in the fridge to make something really pretty.
Yeah, yummy and nourishing. That's the
yes.
We've got lamb chops in the fridge. So I got those from our local farmers market. We've got fantastic local meat producers here. So we know that the cows are all ethically looked after and organic, and it's a great resource. So I think salad as well. Lamb chops and salad tonight.
Yeah, bring it on. I'm hungry now. Thanks for that. Better get to it.
It's a Friday night. We've got to stop. We've got to eat and have that lovely downtime. That's going to be the theme. That's what we want our beautiful mums to take away from this interview is to
Yep.
give yourself, before the day is over, 10 minutes to stop. Nothing. Do absolutely nothing. See if you can. It's actually a challenge.
Yeah. Don't listen to her. Seriously, aim for 5. Aim for 5.
Yeah. don't ask too much. What have we come to? It's outrageous.
Have the 10 for us by next week, though.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's going to be the big challenge. Well, now my vomiting dog is knocking on the door. I don't know if you can hear it, but
No, I can't. That's good.
it's definitely a signal.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this interview. It's absolutely gold, and it's just lovely to talk to you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Anytime.
Thanks so much, Jules. All right, bye for now.
Bye.